Hello, my name is Dan Guerra, and I'm with SDMCentral. And I'm joined today by Dr. Don Bukstein, who's a pediatric pulmonologist and allergist that practices out of Madison and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And he's a longtime physician with an interest in vaccines and adoption, and then a national expert in shared decision making. So, Dr. Bukstein, thank you very much for taking some time to chat with me today.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, today what we're going to do is we want to have a conversation about the COVID-19 vaccinations and the vaccines and kind of the concept of having each individual start to own their decisions. But before we get into that, let's do just a little bit of background. And as we think about vaccinations today, where are we as a country in vaccinations?
Well, I look at it optimistically. We're in a pretty good place, but we could be better. We now have a excess, really, of vaccine, and what we need now is more arms to administer the vaccine to. And I think there's some appropriate what's termed vaccine hesitancy. I like to call it vaccine concern among different segments of our population that we really have to address and get everyone in to get a vaccine.
So, is vaccine concern or vaccine hesitancy, is that really still a concern today in the United States?
Yes, I think it is. Although we have well over half of our population vaccinated, we really need 2/3 or 3/4 of our population vaccinated before we're going to get good herd immunity. And I'm really worried about the younger individuals today. Although it's true younger individuals don't get as sick, we really need to immunize the younger individuals that will be potentially carrying the new variants of the coronavirus or COVID-19 virus, and those new variants are more infectious and potentially more severe, and will affect not only children but spread to unvaccinated adults.
So that's interesting. I noticed as you were giving me a reply, you really focused on young people. But so two follow-up questions when I think about vaccine hesitancy or vaccine concern, as you really stated. So are we seeing like geographic challenges around the country of where people are more likely or less likely to be vaccinated?
Sure. I think one pocket that we really have to address really is the inner city underserved demographic. Our patients and population of color, Latinx, and other minority populations have disproportionately been impacted by the pandemic. And there are pockets within those communities that really have not been vaccinated, and for one reason or another, and we really have to approach. And then there's different areas of the country in the southern United States as opposed to the west or east coast. There's a less percentage of patients that have been vaccinated.
Gotcha. So I know that we've been talking about vaccine concern, and I know that was a big topic at the beginning back in January when the vaccines were starting to be rolled out. But I really haven't heard that much about it. And so, is this an ongoing topic or something that should be more concerning, or has it been going away? And
Well, I think things have been getting better, and I'm optimistic. But I think we have a significant way to go yet to convince and really get our entire population to feel like they're controlling their destiny and owning their decision to get vaccinated. And I think that's going to take us approaching all the different segments of the population that may have a different reason to be concerned about getting a COVID-19 vaccine.
so, for those who are still eliciting vaccine concern or vaccine hesitancy, is like the best tactic just to use a scare tactic and scare them into getting the vaccine?
No, Dan, I think that's really the wrong approach. I don't think we should take a paternalistic approach where we try to scare patients into getting a vaccine. But I think we need to really beseech our patients to think about beyond themselves. And what I mean by that, Dan, is think about their community, their family, and others that they may come in contact with regard to getting vaccinated. It's true that younger individuals have less of a chance of having severe illness, but they still get severe illness, and what they do is act as incubators of the vaccine and give the vaccine and give the virus, incubators of the virus, and give the virus a chance to change and mutate, we call it, and this allows different variants of the virus that may be more effective to stay in the population. And so I think in the long run, we need to really approach all the different segments of our population that have had a little bit of a pushback about getting the vaccines.
I know one of the things that I recently read is that African American, Black, and Latino individuals tend to suffer disproportionately greater symptoms and effects of having COVID-19. Is that right?
Yeah, and mainly because they have more of the comorbidities that make COVID infection worse, such as obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease. There are many comorbidities, we call them, or other problems that are very prevalent in these populations that make it more likely that the COVID virus is going to give that patient significant problems and land them up in the hospital or the ICU.
So I know from our previous conversations that you are a physician that does a lot of practicing in underserved communities, in particular like in Milwaukee. And so when you have conversations about helping individuals overcome vaccine concern, are there common trends that you're hearing or common concerns that you're having to address?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the common concerns is that we being scientists and physicians and the FDA and the CDC, we all rushed to get this vaccine out, and it hadn't been tested enough. When in reality, it really went through all the testing that a normal vaccine goes through, which is much more than the pharmacologic therapy. Any of the drugs that you use today had far less rigorous testing than vaccines have to go through to get approved by the FDA. The difference here, Dan, is that we had a lot of people working on it. We spent a lot of money, and pharmaceutical companies producing vaccines spent a lot of money, had a lot of personnel, all working on the same project. So it's like building a house. If you have 50 people working on it instead of 12, it's going to get built a lot faster. It may be a little more expensive to build it, but it'll get built a lot faster. But the requirements for the building may be exactly the same and both be met by both groups, just take a little longer. We've been working on this vaccine really for over 20 years, since the first coronaviruses, the SARS and the MERS, if you remember those, first were described. Well, we've been working on vaccines in this group of viruses since then. So this wasn't something we just started a year ago. We have been working on this, and especially what's called the or messenger RNA vaccines. We've been working on those for quite a while.
So that's a really interesting point, and I wanted to ask about this. So you've kind of addressed of how the pharmaceutical companies kind of developed a COVID-19 vaccine in over 9 months. It wasn't 9 months; it was 20 years, right?
Right.
So, but I think for people like myself who are not doctors, we really don't understand the difference between the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine and comparing the Pfizer and Moderna to the J&J.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I want to say all the vaccines we've studied so far for COVID-19 work very, very well. And although there may be a little bit different in what they call efficacy, or how well they work in completely preventing a viral infection, they all eliminate the distinct possibility, especially in people with all these comorbidities like obesity and heart disease, they eliminate the chance that you're going to go to the hospital, you're going to be admitted to the ICU, and you may eventually die. So although they have different efficacies in completely preventing the virus, they work pretty much equally well, almost 100%, in preventing the sequelae, or what I mean by sequelae is the result of you getting a viral infection. And so they work really well. The Pfizer and Moderna are pretty much the same. They're messenger RNA vaccines. They are made a little bit differently, but pretty much the same. And the AstraZeneca and the J&J are pretty much the same, and they're made with a vector, which is another virus vector, that in a similar way to we make our influenza vaccines. So nothing's new under the sun. It's just that we have had a lot of people working night and day to get the vaccine available. And we already see the incredible results of vaccinating half of our population and not yet really having herd immunity. We see we're opening up things. If you've been vaccinated, there's little, if any, chance you're going to get an infection. Even if you do, it would be very mild. So I really think that we should be very, very happy with our scientists and the companies that have produced the vaccine, that they've done it in a manner that has proven to be very safe, very effective. And I think as we learn more about the virus, we'll learn whether we even need booster vaccines or how many vaccines we'll need in the future.
So I want to loop back to something that you had mentioned, which is about this idea of efficacy, right? And again, so folks like me who are not doctors, we don't necessarily always understand that. But a couple weeks ago when I was at the barber shop, this turned out to be a pretty big topic of discussion because a lot of people said, well, why would I get the J&J? It's got a really low efficacy rate in comparison to like a Pfizer or Moderna, which are over 90%.
That's a good question, and it's a little hard to understand. When they talk about efficacy, they talk about preventing the infection completely. And J&J and AstraZeneca don't have quite the efficacy of preventing it completely, but all four vaccines, the Moderna, the Pfizer, the J&J, and the AstraZeneca, all prevent almost completely the chance of any significant or severe disease. And certainly they all prevent almost completely the chance of severe disease, hospitalization, and death. So although there is a slight difference, in preventing the infection completely, they all do what we really wanted them to do, and that is decrease to a very small number the amount of people that have to come in the hospital, that have to go in the ICU, intensive care unit, and have to eventually be buried because they've died of COVID.
Gotcha. So it sounds like maybe the efficacy number is not really what should be concerning to me. Making sure I'm vaccinated is probably the more important piece.
Exactly, Dan. It really is get vaccinated. Get vaccinated for yourself, for your family, and for your community, because all benefit. And it really is the right thing to do. Many people have a trust issue that, in fact, these vaccines we're not being truthful about them. As someone who volunteers in an inner city clinic, I can tell you that the people that are making these vaccines and are working night and day, and the people at the FDA and CDC have nothing on their mind except preventing COVID-19 infections in the population.
Got it. So this might be a little bit of a technical question, but I think it's important, and it's come up in conversations that I've had because you were just talking about trust and misinformation. But some folks have said, well, the vaccines that are currently being distributed are being distributed under what's called an emergency use authorization. And so for me, again, who's not a doctor, that sounds pretty extreme. So why should I trust a vaccine that's authorized under emergency use versus something that's been fully approved?
Great question. And emergency use authorization just meant that we were able to proceed very quickly. And in the emergency use authorization, all the milestones that you would meet that had to be there for the FDA, safety, effectiveness, all those milestones needed to be met, but were met in a very shortened time period. So that even with the normal vaccine and how it comes to market over 2 or 3 years, these vaccines had exactly the same milestone, just had more people working on the vaccine development and did it over a shorter period of time. Likewise, I can make an analogy. Sometimes you go in to get a renewal of your driver's license, okay, and you get a picture, and if it's not real crowded, you do all that in a few minutes, but it takes, maybe several months before you actually get your license in the mail. And that's because of the bureaucracy of going through all the data and information and actually making a final decision. So the same thing has happened with the COVID vaccine, and that we have all the milestones, and they've been evaluated and they've been peer reviewed by other physicians and other organizations, and found that the studies were well done and the data was good. And so basically it's kind of that same analogy as you going in and getting your driver's license, and it just takes a little while for your bureaucracy to work through for you to get the final license in the mail, although you can still drive a car.
Gotcha. And I think it's probably important to note that the United States FDA is considered the premier authorization in drug development and drug release.
Yes, the rest of the world really watches our FDA. The FDA has enacted years ago the highest standards for vaccines, because when you think about it, you're not sick when you get a vaccine. You get a vaccine to prevent sickness. So the FDA has demanded the very highest standards of effectiveness, of how well it works, before they'll okay a vaccine.
Okay. So that is good to know, and that's good to understand about the emergency use authorization. So I realize time is running tight, but there's a handful of things I still want to get to here, and I want to jump back to the J&J for a second. So recently in the news, J&J was paused, and maybe it was said women shouldn't get it. Should women be getting the J&J vaccine?
I think if other vaccines are available, I probably wouldn't choose J&J as my first vaccine. But you got to remember that the clotting problems, the blood clotting problems that these women had, were very, very, very rare and are really sort of predictable in certain situations, pregnancy being one of them. Women, this was looked at in a study, and women who are pregnant actually fare very well with the vaccine, have no greater tendencies than a non-pregnant woman that age of having severe reactions. But you have to understand, during pregnancy, we have a heightened concern for patients. So I think that if I was advising a pregnant woman on getting the vaccine, I'd probably opt for the Pfizer, Moderna. But I don't think the J&J really has an appreciable number of problems associated with it. And one of the things that I thought was wonderful is they paused the J&J administration when these potential problems came to light. And that shows me that they really were paying attention to what was going on. So I want to really emphasize that I think the J&J vaccine is very effective and is indicated in women who are pregnant, but that given a choice, you might opt for one of the vaccines. If one of the vaccines wasn't available, I certainly would encourage taking the J&J vaccine, because getting the disease and being pregnant is really problematic. Pregnancy does complicate things a bit. And there have been many hundreds of patients that are pregnant that got COVID that had problems with that pregnancy. So the chances of having problems with your pregnancy and potentially the life of your unborn child are markedly increased by getting the COVID virus, and they really aren't appreciable and really not all that significant. Very, very, very rare with regard to the vaccine.
So that's good feedback to really kind of understand that that if you've got access to the vaccine, I should get the vaccine.
Right.
That's basically what you're telling me, right?
Right. If you've got a chance to get the vaccine, and we want to make it so that it's easy to get. I'd like it so you could get it in any pharmacy, at your doctor's office, or if they're offering it at the Bucks basketball game, and we hope they win tomorrow night. But any place that they offer the vaccine, you should get it.
Okay. So when we start talking about folks with vaccines, so we've been having this conversation, and we've been talking a lot about U.S. adults. We've talked about underserved communities, but one of the population groups that we actually haven't talked a lot about is children. And I believe if I recall my facts right, I think the Pfizer vaccine is available to young people 16 and up, and I believe Moderna will be available. But I mean, do kids really even need to be vaccinated?
And that's a good question. We know that kids don't have as severe an infection, but there are plenty of kids, especially with the new variant, that are getting infected and having problems with COVID. So my advice would be is, as the vaccine is approved for ages down to 6, which should be by the beginning of this, by the end of this year or beginning of next year at the latest, we really want to get that population vaccinated so they can go back to school and not spread the vaccine and be not have to wear masks and not have to social distance, and that we can resume normal school activities. And the only way that's really going to occur is if this younger population gets vaccinated. Also, even though they're not having as severe infection, they still get infected, and there have been many deaths in the younger population from 6 to 12.
And well, Dr. Bukstein, I mean, to that point, one of the things I should probably ask you about is so we've read a lot about these COVID-19 long haul symptoms. And I think it's probably fair to say that we don't know what the long-haul effects are of COVID-19 in young people, which would be a reason to be vaccinated. Is that right?
Right. I think we're just beginning to understand that there may be some long-term issues. We know there's some issues with the virus with regard to affecting the heart and lungs of young individuals. And the heart effects can last for a long time if you get the virus. And even though they're not super frequent, they're frequent enough that that is a problem. Even with the vaccine, the Pfizer and the Moderna, we've seen a few cases of what's called myocarditis, inflammation of the heart. These have tended to be very mild, very rare, just a few hundred and many millions of patients that have been vaccinated, over 20 million patients vaccinated, a few hundred cases, where there have been thousands and thousands of cases with the COVID virus of this myocarditis. But still, this is something that we want to be aware of, and physicians are aware of, that can occur in usually younger patients. The bottom line is, if we are to get back to school and our youngsters are going to get back on the field and the playgrounds and active and being with each other, and socialization is going to occur, we need to get them vaccinated. And that's the road to basically getting things back to normal.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about the generalities for the public and what we need to know about and what we should be doing with our peers. But my question would be, you're a physician educator. So you're a doctor, you're a pediatrician, you see patients on a weekly basis, but you educate your peers. And I know you recently just delivered a program on COVID-19 and misinformation. And I believe you did it in what was referred to as a problem-based learning format. And so for those of us who aren't physicians, and candidly, for those of us who are, can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was of misinformation and how you went about delivering that presentation? And just as importantly, what kind of feedback did you receive from your peers?
Well, Dan, I think this is a great way to kind of conclude things. I recently gave a problem-based learning conference. This was a conference where we presented a case And then we discussed the different aspects of the case. And this was a patient who was hesitant, or I like to say concerned about the COVID vaccine. She was thinking about pregnancy in the future and was worried about the vaccine. We went through, for physicians in the audience, how to do shared decision making. What shared decision making is you go over the options and the concerns and you discuss those and give the patient examples that they can understand of both the pros, cons, burdens that each may offer, the burdens of having the disease and pros and cons of getting the vaccine, and really talk about risk communication. And when you do that, with patients, it tends to activate the patient so that they understand and can, what we like to term, own their own decision. They can own the fact that they make a decision to get the vaccine. I think what I would recommend as we conclude is that everyone listening can go to several good sources of information, especially about problem-based learning and shared decision-making. You can go to go.sdmcentral.com/Dr. Bukstein, or you can go to DEBEAUMONT.org/changing/the/conversation. Both are really good websites that give question and answers to other commonly asked questions. And I want to thank you, Dan, for having me today and letting me transmit some good information, accurate scientific information about the COVID vaccines and the importance of everyone
Wait a second, Dr.
getting
Bukstein,
them.
you didn't think I was going to let you leave here so quickly, did you?
I thought you might.
You were getting close, but you are a nationally known expert on shared decision making, and I think it's important to note that you are leading a project for the Allergy Asthma Network on COVID-19, and we've alluded to it a couple of times, but do you just want to say just a little bit about the project you're working on?
Well, I hate to beat my own drum, but we are working with the Allergy and Asthma Network, a patient advocacy group for allergies and asthma, and we're working with Shared Decision Making Central, SDMCentral, that produces and makes and distributes shared decision making aids and validates them, and developing a shared decision making aid, and we call it Owning Your Decision, for COVID vaccine. And this is really aimed at people who are concerned about getting the COVID vaccine, want more information, and want to be able to discuss it in a shared manner, all the options as far as the pros, the cons, the burdens, the risks, and the benefits associated with COVID vaccine.
Well, great. I appreciate you sharing that with us, and I think it's important because your partnership and your leadership with the Allergy Asthma Network and working on the COVID-19 Owning Your Decision project, I think is really important, and so thank you. And to anybody listening, thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we look forward to talking with you next time.